Welcome to Worldview Matters, discussing controversial issues, discerning current events, defending biblical Christianity. No topic off limits. And now, here's your host, David Fiorazzo.
Hey friends, welcome, brothers and sisters in Christ. Thank you for sharing the podcast and for tuning in. We appreciate you very much. We've got Josh McDowell here today. I can't wait to talk to him. It's been years. I've been wanting to have him on the show, but I want to mention one more time, this Thursday night, I'm going to be speaking at Calvary Sunrise Church. It's a free event. We'll be doing a Q&A at around 7:15 p.m. And the topic really responding to what's going on in our culture, in the church, the attacks on believers, and the biblical worldview. So that's this Thursday night, April 11, 6:30 p.m. That's in Oshkosh. Pass that around, please, to your Northeast Wisconsin friends. Okay, guys, you're in for a treat. Dr. Josh McDow is a gifted communicator. He's got a passion for equipping the church, and in particular, young people, and this generation really needs it, I'll tell you. He makes the case for the Christian faith. He's an apologist. He connects with audiences in a tangible way through humor and stories. He's an amazing author as well. He is an associate professor in the Christian Apologetics program at Talbot School of Theology, Biola University. And brother, we just want to get to you right now and just get you on. Sean, welcome to Worldview Matters. Good to see you.
David, thanks so much for having me. This is a treat.
Yeah, it's a treat for us, man. I'll tell you. And that was, by the way, like friends, that was like 1/8 of his bio and all that you've done. And the first thing right off the bat, Josh McDowell. I mean, most of us who are older, some of us don't look our age, but if you look close, you can see the gray. We cut our teeth on your dad's books, and an amazing pillar in the Christian community. One of the things I've always wanted to ask you, did you feel that pressure growing up with your dad's Josh McDowell? You know, can you share a little bit about that and if that influenced your decision on what to do with your vocation, your ministry?
My parents never once put pressure on me to follow in my dad's footsteps. The narrative I remember was God's given you certain gifts, use it for the kingdom, whether that's coaching, whether that was going into politics. I thought that for some time. There was never an expectation from my parents. Even when I started expressing, speaking and doing things like my dad, he was almost more reserved than I expected him to be so, because I think he really realized that there's a lot of criticism and a lot of weight doing what we do. And if you're not in it because you feel equipped and motivated and in a sense called by God, it's going to end in disaster. So any pressure I felt was either other people putting it on me or just self-imposed, but it was never my parents having that expectation at all.
Well, like you said, you probably felt it from outside of the home. Just they looked at you like, hey, you're Josh McDowell's son, right? What's Sean going to do when he gets older, when he gets out of high school or whatever? But you went to Biola. I love Biola. I've been there. I knew a couple professors there. Great college, university. And I want to just mention some of your books for maybe some of our newer believers in our audience that may be unfamiliar with your ministry. I mean, the Evidence That Demands a Verdict. I mean, you did that with your dad. Of course, that came out years ago. Also, Evidence for the Resurrection. Set Adrift is a more recent book. You've got, A Rebel's Manifesto. And what else? Apologetics for a New Generation. Is God Just a Human Invention? I mean, it goes on and on. How many are you up to? 20, 30? Where are you at now with books, Sean?
Well, some I've written solo, some I've co-written, and a few I've edited. And so it's about 20 books from academic to popular level student books.
Wow. Incredible. Great ministry. So before we go on, I want to mention the latest book, which I just recently found out about, and that's why one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you as well. It's a rewrite of something you did with your dad in, was it 2010? Am I going back too far?
Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
It's called 12 Crucial Truths of the Christian Faith. Can you tell us a little bit about that and maybe what was changed and updated?
Yeah, so the heart of that book was to really do what we call relational theology or relational apologetics. So there are some systematic theologies that people have written that walk through sinfulness of mankind, God is triune, God is a creator, but they tend to be very light on application. And then there's some books on relationship that tend to be light on theology, and frankly, sometimes use the translation that makes the point the author best wants to be made. What we really realized is that theology is meant to be lived out in relationship with God, with others, and in a sense, with the self and in creation. And so we want to lay out the 12 essential truths that are essential for salvation. That's what we mean by crucial truths. These are Nicene Creed type truths that go back to the really beginning of the church, that are affirmed like Jesus is God, God is triune, salvation is by faith, etc. And then incorporate in that how to live them out relationally. Because you look at Paul's letters, like Romans, Paul lays out, this really robust theology in the opening chapters of Romans. And then you start getting into like chapter 12, and he's talking about what it means to love people in light of that theology. So we wanted to follow that model. Now, really what's different in this book is it's shorter than the 2010 version. And I think people always like more concise, shorter. We've also updated a lot of like the evidence for God that's in one of the chapters. That's been updated because the intelligent design argument has only gotten stronger. And then there's two chapters in particular that I made stronger. I always felt like once a book is out, sometimes I look back, I'm like, oh, if I ever update it, I want to tweak this. And I wanted to make the chapter on human sinfulness more robust, and the chapter on God being a Trinity more robust. And I think both of those we really did.
Is that the one, number 3, truth number 3, all have sinned, that chapter?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's not really popular, unfortunately, even in some churches. It's just we've got to get back to that biblical worldview. And you've heard the Barna research, Pew, Gallup, and the biblical worldview declining. So your work is really important. And just going back, kind of getting back to the basics. And it sounds like the essentials. It sounds like that's what you did in this book, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Sometimes I write timely books. Like I wrote a book on same-sex marriage a decade ago with John Stonestreet. That was very timely because it was the year before the ruling came out.
Yeah.
This is a timeless book. These are the essential truths the church has always been teaching since the beginning. Now, how we live that out relationally and culture has shifted. But this is a timeless book. Really, the only thing that shifted, like you said, is biblical illiteracy has increased. So you look at the number of self-described Christians who believe that Jesus sinned, who believe that there's other ways to get to God outside of Jesus, is frankly just shocking and alarming. Biblical literacy is at an all-time low. So we're just trying to take these core, essential biblical truths that mark somebody being a Christian across denominations and help people understand them and live them out in today's time relationally.
What do you think about what you were just sharing, which we both kind of mentioned about in the church? I mean, you'd expect religious pluralism and syncretism to be popular in our culture, because people like to grab a little bit of everything, kind of like you're making a quilt, a patchwork theology, right?
Yeah.
I take a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Oh, that sounds good. I'll take some New Age with a little bit of Marxism and maybe, Christianity. Yeah, there's some good things about Jesus. But how did that, Sean McDowell, how did that impact the church? How did that get into the church where now you've got a lot of professing Christians that are apparently confused about the essentials, about what the biblical worldview is?
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons for this. One reason is that the cultural pressures are so intense that even, I would say many, if not most Christians, have an at least somewhat secular worldview. And I could go into reasons why I know this, especially with students, whether it's the studies from like Barna or whether it's my personal time I spend with students and I probe and press and ask questions. And underneath it, you find like individualism, you find a subjective view of truth. You just bring these things to the surface. So one reason is, people are in church, if they go every other week now, an hour, maybe youth group, and they're spending so much more time on their phones and in non-Christian podcasts and just being shaped by the world. Yeah. That's a reality. And second is, I don't know that we're doing as good of a job as we can in the church to really teach these things. So much of evangelicalism, I think in our moment right now, has been overcome by more feelings than by thinking. Now it's both. We're to love God with our hearts and with our minds and with our soul and with our strength. But sometimes we look at somebody, and the test of a faithful disciple is we'll ask questions like, why, how fired up are you? That person's really on fire for the Lord. And that means they're just full of like emotion and fervor. And that kind of tailors to be a faithful disciple is to have a certain level of emotional commitment. Yeah. I don't see that in the scripture, that that's what it means to be a faithful disciple. So I think the reason there's so much biblical literacy is the pressure coming from our culture, but also within the church. Sometimes we emphasize emotions out of balance. We don't really teach a Christian worldview. We bring secular ideas into the church and don't teach people how to think about everything in the world from a Christian perspective. Give you one last example, David. I was talking to two men in their 30s who are engineers. They've been in the church their entire lives. And I said, I'm curious, how do you uniquely think about being an engineer as a Christian? They looked at each other. They looked at me and said, I don't know. We've never thought about it. I mean, you let that sink in. They've been in the church their entire lives and never made a connection from their Bible and their Sunday and their preaching to how they spend 40 hours a week. Something profoundly has been broken in the way we are supposed to pass on and teach the faith today.
Wow. That's amazing. Another thing I heard you say, feelings are so overemphasized and exaggerated today. Like that rules a lot of people's decision making. And there's been some bad theologies because of how we want to feel about ourselves, right? Follow your heart.
Yeah.
You just do you. Just be, do it if you feel. And that's where a lot of this stuff sounds good on the outside. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. I'm talking to Sean McDowell saying, okay, this is what I've seen, what I've observed. Anyway, we've got to take a brief pause. When we come back, more with Sean McDowell about the book, 12 Crucial Truths of the Christian Faith.
Introducing Patriot Mobile, the wireless carrier that stands with you. We are committed to supporting the values that make our nation great. With affordable plans and reliable nationwide coverage, Patriot Mobile is not just a wireless service. It's a call to action for those who believe in the American dream. Because this year is not just any year, it's the most important year since our nation's founding. Choose a wireless carrier that shares your values. Choose Patriot Mobile.
Get free activation now with promo code DAVID. Hey friends, if you're listening via audio and you would like to help us, maybe rise in the rankings a little bit, I hear that if you leave a 5-star review, that helps. And also, if you're interested in being a sponsor of Worldview Matters, you can email us. Just go to our website. The easiest thing to remember, worldviewmatters.tv, and our producer will get right back to you. So Sean, let's take a little veer off the book for a moment. One of the things when I was looking at all your website and your press kit under your expertise, apologetics, reaching the next generation, Gen Z, you talk a lot and teach on sexuality and identity. Thank you very much. It's very important. But one of the areas is also cultural engagement. And because we haven't been taught to get outside of church walls generally in a lot of churches, salt and light, we've lost those concepts really, and how we influence culture for righteousness or be ambassadors. So how can we be better in America, particularly at cultural engagement?
Well, I guess I would say a couple of things. Number one is we just got to be informed. We have to know what's going on. So I spent a ton of time listening to podcasts like yours that keep me updated on worldview issues and cultural issues. I have dozens of podcasts I listen to from all different perspectives of issues. I have blogs that I follow. I have YouTube channels that I follow, news channels. Like, we just as Christians need to be informed. But second, as I hinted at, we also have to know other perspectives, not just our own. So recently a friend handed me his phone. He goes, "Hey, I realize I don't follow you, choose your podcast for me." I'm like, "Sure." And I looked, and all of his podcasts were completely right-wing political pundits. There was nobody with balance. And it's fine. I listen to people on the right and I listen to people on the left because I always want to have balance. And if I only listen to people that tend to agree with me, I'm going to think the other side is just stupid and they're idiots. I mean, Proverbs 18:20 says the first to speak in court sounds right until the cross-examination begins. So sometimes they don't have good cultural engagement. It's because we just listen to one perspective on issues and don't really know why people believe what they believe. And so we've got to do that. The third thing is we just got to be in relationships with people. If we don't have relationships with people who see the world differently, then how are we actually going to shape the world? I mean, honestly, I used to talk a lot more about changing culture, and I started to realize I have very little influence on changing culture, but I can make relationships with people. I can reach out to people. I can try to influence the sphere that I have. And if I think more bottom up, then I'm just being faithful. And so be informed, learn both sides, and just get out and meet and get to know people of a different worldview. I mean, a week ago, I went to an iftar dinner at a mosque. It was absolutely fascinating. I've befriended an imam who's there, such a thoughtful guy. We did a whole documentary on it. We're going to air soon. Just to my visit there, didn't have a debate, just ask questions. I had an atheist on my channel recently. Like, I'm just trying to build relationships with people who see the world differently. And I really think if somebody in their life just went through trouble and pain and hurt, and their next thought was, I just need to find a Christian because a Christian will listen non-judgmentally and love me. How radical would that be? How radical would that be? And honestly, that's something all of us can do.
You've been talking about that for years, and I appreciate that. You focus on the relational aspect, and isn't that what we're supposed to be, loving our neighbors, right? We want to share the gospel with them. But you recently spoke at a church. I don't remember what event it was, but let me see. The title was Understanding the Gender Revolution, Christianity and the Transgender Movement. And you were talking about how important it is to ask questions. Ask questions. Jesus asked more questions than he gave answers to, you said. But I'll never forget, because we're told to get into groups, right? We're told to be very tribal and to be, I don't know, just not to dislike people who aren't like us. And that's not Christian, of course, but so we got to break some of those habits. But you said something very fascinating when you were called to give an opinion on CNN. The producer talked to you and you gave him a response, and they said, well, we can't have you on because you're too compassionate. And I know what they're trying to do. We know that game. They're trying to pit, right and left. Good, they're trying to get fire for ratings. Share that a little bit, because that's really a tactic that maybe both sides do, if we're going to be honest, on the media. But go ahead and share that. That was very fascinating to me.
This was actually in 2015 when the Obergefell versus Hodges Supreme Court ruling on same-sex marriage came out. CNN was hosting a show in LA. I live in Southern Orange County. And they were having a conversation about how the church was going to respond and beyond to the ruling. So I got a call from the Southern Baptists in Southern California to see if I could go on CNN that night. And there was just no way because of prior commitments, taking my kids to stuff. So he gives me the number for the executive producer of the show and says, just call him, see if you can work something out. So ended up calling this guy. It wasn't going to work out. He goes, hey, can I keep your number if something else comes up? I said, sure. Never expected to hear from him. Maybe a couple hours later, I get a call and he goes, hey, I know you can't be here in person, but could you call in? Because we're doing a show on the transition of Bruce Jenner to Caitlyn Jenner. And David, I was literally about to say no, but my son in the back was 11 at the time. He goes, do it, Dad. You'll be on TV. And I was like, okay. Sure, I'll do it because my son wants me to. He asked me, he goes, okay, so what's your position? And as best I can remember, I said something like, I'm a Christian and I know that Jesus loves people who are transgender. This has become a political issue and this community is hurting. We need to slow down, find common ground, and actually discover ways to help this community. Something like that. Long pause. He goes, man, I'm sorry, I can't have you on. You're just too compassionate. And I just immediately thought, oh my goodness, I'm such a rookie. I thought they were trying to help. Isn't that the purpose? But no, I watched the show a couple hours later. It was my son's idea. And the show was just a circus.
Yeah.
It was, people are yelling and cutting off and there's drama. And they had somebody call in. I think it was from churchmilitant.com. That's who they got to replace me. And so it reminded me that so much of our conversations about this are political. They're for ratings. They're meant to increase the temperature and divide rather than actually find common ground and help people. And so when it comes to transgender, there is a political component to this, for sure. There's a philosophical component to this. There is what's called transgender ideology, but there's also individuals who are struggling with gender dysphoria. There's a lot of individuals. There's an article in the New York Times a few weeks ago that said, yes, this is by Pamela Paul, an opinion piece. Those who identify as transgender are more likely to have psychological just abnormalities or illnesses, anxiety, depression, etc. But really, it's not because they're transgender. There's underlying psychological distress that they're experiencing that is manifesting itself in the different transgender identity in the vast majority of cases. Now, you and I have been saying that and known that for years, but to see it pop up in the New York Times was really, really interesting. Yeah. So that people could go to YouTube if they want to watch it, it's there. But I'm basically making a distinction between transgender individuals we're called to love, care for, lean into with relationships, but also recognize there is a worldview being pushed right now through media, education, sports, university, etc. And we need to say time out and run it through a biblical lens because it has a very different idea of what it means to be human, the equivalent of what sin is in the world, and ultimately how we fix it.
Let's talk a little bit more about this, Sean, because this happens to be, I spoke at a youth camp a couple times. This was just in the last couple of years. And after the Saturday night session, there was a line of kids. They could have gone to the campfire. They could have gone to play music, eat snacks, but there's a line of kids. And 9 out of 10 of them wanted to talk about a friend who was LGBTQ or the transgender issue. This is huge now, this cultural moment that we're in. If the church doesn't get how to respond to this, that's why I appreciate what you do and how you teach on this. And I want to go back to something you shared in that presentation. I know we're getting off the book, but you talk about this. It's very important. You said one study found that 41% of people who identify as transgender will attempt suicide at some point in their lives. Now, talk about a Christian and being compassionate. This should break our hearts. And these are people that are genuinely confused and they're sold lies. Many have been deceived, and they're not all the agenda-driven, the ones that are pushing legislation and trying to access young children. So how can we be better balanced, Sean, in this and understand that so many people there's lives are at stake, not just eternally, of course, but in this case, suicide rates are they're off the charts today.
It's very clear that the transgender community has more suffering psychologically, anxiety, depression, loneliness, suicidality than the population as a whole. But the narrative is that the reason for this is the non-affirmation or non-acceptance of society as a whole. So in other words, that means people like you and me and pastors who don't affirm this are causing the suffering. Well, one way to test this is to go look at other countries that are more affirming, like Sweden and the Netherlands, and we would expect the psychological state of the LGBTQ community and the transgender individuals to be better. That's not what we find. There's not a significant difference there. Now, that doesn't tell us why individuals who identify as transgender suffer, but it tells us why they don't. It cannot be blamed solely on something external, the non-affirmation of society. And I think more and more data is coming out that there are underlying psychological struggles that so often go with and cause the pain behind some of what we see in the transgender movement. We need to be willing to love these individuals, care for these individuals, lean into their lives, but also speak truth in an age when that truth is not popular, so to speak.
I'll say understatement. Truth is not popular. I mean, there's been a war on truth for who knows how long. And, but we are here for such a time as this, right, Sean? You've got a ministry. I've got a ministry. We've all got work to do. And my goodness, I know it's an uphill battle because the church has not been equipped. The saints have not been equipped from the pulpit. And we can look at the problems all day long. But we've got to start looking at solutions and trying to live this out, as you say, relationally. Lovingly share the gospel. People will have different responses to it. But the book, friends, I want to direct you to Sean's website again, seanmcdowell.org. And also you can go on Amazon and see all of his great books there. But this one, 12 Crucial Truths of the Christian Faith. And I mean, there's other ones we didn't get a chance to because of time. Truth number 3, all have sinned. Truth number 4 is that God became human, a radical claim, of course. Truth number 9, we worship God, one God in 3 persons. Nothing controversial about that, right? But I thought about Athanasius of Alexandria and the Council of Nicaea, and that around that time they were hashing all that out, doing that. But anyway, great work. We appreciate you, Sean. It went by so fast, and I thank you for your voice and your ministry. I hope we can talk again, maybe when your next book comes out. By the way, anything you're working on now? Any events, any books?
Got a book called End the Stalemate coming out in June, which is all about having conversations with people that are civil, common ground based in an incarnational model, like God becoming human and understanding us. How do we lean into other people's lives and truly understand their worldview, engage in meaning dialogue? I can't wait for that book to come out. And we've done an update to More Than Carpenter coming out in the fall.
Oh, my goodness. I'll end the stalemate. You had me right there, brother. All right, Lord willing, we'll talk again. But thanks for your time today. God bless you and your ministry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, my goodness, guys, what a blessing. Influential men and women of God we get to talk to and share with. And I hope it really blesses you and edifies you and equips you. And there's great resources that you can find by, just going to our guests' websites on Worldview Matters. Thank you, guys. God bless you. And as always, keep speaking the truth about things that matter.